All right, everybody, and hello on this Friday afternoon. I hope you've been enjoying the summit and have had some great takeaways from some of the sessions that you've attended. And I am thrilled to present today's speaker. It's Silent McCarthy, and she is going to be talking to us today about some invisible disabilities that we might have. Um, in high performing academic centers. I'm sorry, in academic environments. She is a visual impairment specialist and access case manager in disability services at Louisiana State University. She's a former graduate assistant for us in the um, academic center. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Silent.
Okay, see if I can get this to share. This one. Hi, everyone. I know no one has their camera on, but hello. Yeah, from beginning. Okay. All right. So thank you all for being here. My name is Silent McCarthy. As Dr. B said, I currently serve as a visual impairment specialist and an access case manager in disability services. Prior to this role, I worked as a strategy tutor and a graduate assistant for football advising with the Cox Communication Academic Center. Through both roles, I have had the opportunity to support student athletes navigating complex academic schedules while also managing high performance expectations in athletics. One pattern I have consistently observed is that many academic challenges for student athletes are not related to lack of ability or lack of effort. Instead, they often reflect how high performance environments interact with cognitive load and executive functioning demands. So today's session focuses on invisible disabilities and how we can design systems that support consistency without lowering academic standards. See if this, there we go. All right. Student athletes are balancing expectations across multiple domains at the same time. They are managing academic coursework, athletic performance, team obligations, travel schedules, recovery needs, and often public visibility. Many academic systems are designed with the assumption that students can redistribute effort across the week. For example, a student might choose to study earlier in the day, work later in the evening, or use gaps between class to recover attention. Student athletes often have much less flexibility to make those adjustments because much of their day is already structured. When flexibility decreases, small inefficiencies can compound very quickly. Something that may feel manageable in a flexible schedule can feel much more difficult in a highly structured schedule. Today, we'll focus on how invisible disabilities often affect consistency rather than capability. We will look at how athletic environments can amplify cognitive load, where systems unintentionally create friction, and strategies that can support performance while maintaining rigor. My goal is that you leave this session with at least one strategy that feels realistic to implement within your role. This is not about adding more work. It is about identifying where small structural adjustments can reduce repeated challenges for students and staff. Now, invisible disabilities often influence executive functioning processes that support learning. Executive functioning includes working memory, task initiation, organization of multi-step assignments, sustained attention, cognitive endurance, and stress regulation. Students may fully understand course material, but experience variability in their ability to consistently demonstrate that understanding when cognitive demands accumulate. Performance variability often reflects changes in cognitive load rather than differences in ability. Students may appear inconsistent when the total demand placed on working memory exceeds the available capacity. So a lot of times when I tell people that I work in disability, they immediately think like, Oh, well, of course, I work with the blind. I work with the deaf, the hard of hearing, students that have motor impairments. And what people are often very surprised to hear is that our biggest group of students that we service are students with invisible disabilities. We service about 4,000 students, and 1,500 of them are cases of ADHD. Executive functioning load refers to the total amount of mental effort required to manage tasks and responsibilities. So, executive functioning includes the cognitive processes that allow us to plan, organize, prioritize, initiate tasks, monitor progress, and adjust when conditions change. These processes rely heavily on working memory. Working memory has a limited capacity and it is constantly being used to track all sorts of information. For student athletes, working memory may be managing academic deadlines, practice schedules, travel logistics, communication from multiple offices, and eligibility requirements all at the same time. So each responsibility requires some sort of mental effort, and executive functioning load increases as the number of tasks and decisions increases. For example, a student athlete may be simultaneously tracking when their assignments are due, but they're also thinking about the plays that they need to learn for their next game. So this doesn't necessarily reflect a lack of ability or effort. It reflects the limits of cognitive capacity under high demand conditions. So when the working memory is overloaded, students may focus on the most immediate task rather than the most important task, which oftentimes puts academics farther down on the list. So urgent tasks require less planning, so they often take priority when cognitive resources are limited, and reducing understanding executive functioning load helps us to recognize that performance variability may be related to cognitive demand rather than motivation. Reducing unnecessary complexity in scheduling and communication can help preserve some of that cognitive capacity and set it aside for learning tasks. So many students stabilize their academic performance by redistributing efforts across the week. For example, a typical student might complete demanding assignments earlier in the week when their cognitive energy is really high, or use gaps between classes to review material. They may adjust pacing strategies or choose to complete assignments at times when they feel most focused. Flexibility allows students to compensate when attention or endurance fluctuates. Student athletes often have much fewer opportunities to make these adjustments because much of their day is structured around team commitments. Flexibility is often an invisible support that many students rely on. When flexibility decreases, cognitive variability becomes more visible. So what changes for student athletes? Student athletes are balancing dual performance expectations. They are expected to perform physically and cognitively at high levels. Physical fatigue can influence cognitive endurance. Travel can disrupt sleep schedules and study routines. Team commitments often occur at fixed times, which reduces the student's ability to choose when they complete demanding academic work. So as a result, the academic tasks that may need to occur during times when cognitive resources are already reduced, because that's where they see that they can have that flexibility. So the amplification effect. The disability itself may not change in the athletic environment. So a lot of times, I know when I worked in athletics, like we would say things like, oh, well, they only care about, what they're doing on the field. They work really hard there, but they don't work very hard here. The disability is still happening in the athletic environment. What changes is the level of constraint that's placed on the student's schedule. So compression increases cumulative fatigue. Cumulative fatigue can influence attention, processing speed, working memory efficiency, and decision making. Students may appear inconsistent when they are working consistently. Same ability, different performance conditions. So I'm gonna stop for a second. So if you just want to put your answer in the chat, it's always a little weird when you have a virtual conference. But my question was, where do you most often see compression occurring for student athletes? They have one. Evening study hall. I actually brought up study hall. I'm going to talk about that specifically at the towards the end of my presentation. What else? Waiting to the last minute to complete assignments, studying for exams, and doing something less active. During athletic travel, when their season begins or transitioning into postseason. I remember when I was a graduate assistant, I was um, doing strategy tutoring for women's basketball while they were in March Madness, and I felt like I was the worst tutor in the entire world because I just couldn't get them to initiate tasks because all they were thinking about was getting that natty. These are great answers. All right, I'm gonna keep going. There we go. So it is important to recognize that neurodivergence also includes a lot of strengths. Many neurodivergent individuals demonstrate persistence, pattern recognition, creative problem solving, and strong response to feedback. Some student athletes thrive in structured environments that include clear expectations and consistent routines. Variability in executive functioning does not reduce capability. Student supports often allow strengths to appear more consistently. So when students miss tutoring or submit their work late, interpretations often focus on motivation. Executive functioning load theory encourages us to consider capacity and cognitive demand. Reframing does not remove accountability. Reframing improves accuracy and problem-solving conversations. So instead of assuming a student is not prioritizing academics, we might consider whether the total cognitive load exceeded their available capacity. This allows us to adjust structures rather than assuming lack of their effort. So, can you think of a situation where something initially appeared to be a motivation issue, but was later connected to workload or scheduling?
I'm going to get off mute if you don't mind, silent.
Sure. Yeah,
I think a lot of times, especially earlier in my career, not really understanding neurodivergence and effect it had on executive functioning and how it, to the mm, population at large, that initiation of tasks looks like a lack of motivation. It looks like this person just doesn't want to do it. But and it sometimes it kind of looks like defiance, because you're asking, you're pleading, you're begging, and it's just not happening, but not really understanding how a neurodivergent brain works, and that executive functioning is just so hard that to overcome in those instances. I think the more I learned about it, the more I really had more grace for a lot of student athletes, and where I thought was defiance, it was actually just a hurdle that we had to kind of find and overcome together.
I agree. Um, we have recently received a grant to focus on neurodivergence, and we're working on our toolkit because what we found is that we can have a student that is neurodivergent, let's just say ADHD, and we can give them double time. And that might seem like a good idea, but if they don't know how to manage that time and they're not able to start the exam or start the assignment, the double time means absolutely nothing. So we're heavily focusing on executive functioning skills in our office right now. So we are moving from deficit thinking to performance thinking. So instead of not prioritizing academics, consider the cognitive load has exceeded capacity. Instead of poor time management, consider insufficient recovery time between demands. I have seen some of the schedules for student athletes where they are going from tutoring, they have a 10-minute break, and go check in with their advisor, then they have a 10-minute break, and then to go back to study hall. And I know that me personally, I need a little break between my meetings for me to be able to show up and be intentional in my next commitment. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the timing of this conversation. So at this point in the semester, many of us are already operating under high demand conditions. Caseloads tend to increase, communication volume increases, and timelines begin to compress. Students are often experiencing cumulative fatigue from travel, exams, performance expectations, and staff are often managing a higher number of requests, adjustments, and urgent needs than they were at the beginning of the semester. And this is often the point in the semester where small challenges begin to feel much larger because the margin for flexibility is reduced. We only have 3 weeks left in the semester. It's also important to acknowledge that cognitive reframing can be more difficult when systems are strained. So when we're busy in our brains tend to default to quicker interpretations because we are making so many decisions throughout the day. When we are managing a high volume of responsibilities, it can be harder to pause and consider alternate explanations for student behavior. For example, when communication is delayed or a student misses an appointment, it may be tempting to assume lack of follow through when in reality, the student may be managing multiple overlapping demands. The goal here is not to suggest that anyone should take on additional work or completely redesign their processes during the busiest point of the semester. Instead, the goal is to just identify small adjustments that may reduce repeated challenges in the future. Even small structural changes, such as earlier planning conversations, slightly more coordinated scheduling, can reduce last-minute problem solving later on. Small adjustments are still possible even in these high demand periods, and often those small adjustments can make a meaningful difference in reducing stress for both the students and support staff. So each office is typically fulfilling its responsibilities appropriately. Faculty maintain the rigor, coaches maintain performance expectations, advisors are monitoring eligibility, and disability services is ensuring access. The friction often occurs between systems rather than within them. Students frequently become the coordinators between these offices, and this increases executive functioning demand. So I think where I see this the most in my role is that the advisors will have their students like schedule an exam and they tell them like, you need to schedule your exam before you leave today. They schedule their exam and they pick the very last time available in the testing window. Well, then they realize like this is too much for this week. Like, can I push my exam back? Then they're calling our office. Hey, can I reschedule my exam? And we're going based off of our policies, like, well, no, you can't reschedule your exam because that's not in the faculty testing agreement. You're not in the testing window. So everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. The advisors are making sure that they schedule their exams, and disability services is making sure they follow the faculty test agreement, but the misalignment is creating friction. So students may be expected to anticipate conflicts, communicate with multiple stakeholders, and request adjustments under pressure. Each of these tasks requires planning, prioritizing, and communication skills. Executive functioning demands are highest when cognitive load is the highest. Reducing the number of decisions students must make during high compression periods can improve follow through. So support fragmentation occurs when assistance is scheduled in ways that increase cognitive switching. Too many short appointments across the day may reduce uninterrupted work time. Each transition requires mental effort. Students must disengage from one task and re-engage with another, and frequent switching can reduce efficiency and increase fatigue. So longer protected work blocks often allow deeper engagement with complex material. And all of us have been there before. We're working on something and then your work wife comes in and says, "Hey, you want to go get something to eat?" You're like, "Oh, let me finish this first," because you're not ready to disengage with what you're doing and refocus on something else because then you're going to have to come back and get back into that work. So fragmentation refers to situations where a student's time and attention are divided into many small segments across the day, making it difficult to sustain focus on complex tasks. For example, a student athlete's day may include class, practice, tutoring, study hall treatment, meetings, and required check-ins, spaced very closely together. Even when each support is helpful individually, the cumulative structure may reduce opportunities for deep work. Deep work is often required for reading comprehension, writing, problem solving, and integrating any new information. Each transition between tasks requires cognitive effort. Students must mentally disengage from one task, recall expectations for the next task, and re-engage their working memory. Frequent switching can reduce efficiency and increase fatigue. Fragmentation often increases decision fatigue because students must repeatedly decide what to work on next within limited time windows. So, reducing fragmentation doesn't mean reducing support, it just means designing support in ways that preserve sustained attention. Examples may include scheduling fewer but longer support sessions, coordinating communication across offices, or protecting blocks of uninterrupted study time. Protecting cognitive bandwidth allows students to engage more effectively with complex material. So I have another question for you, and it is, where might fragmentation unintentionally occur in your current structure? Please put your answers in the chat. So where might fragmentation unintentionally occur in your current schedule? So think about how you have your caseload of students scheduled right now. So one that I can think of is that if a student has like a tutoring session and then we ask them to come downstairs and check in with us before they go off to study hall, a lot of times they won't be engaged in that check-in because they're hoping that the check-in will only take 2 minutes so they can have the other 28 minutes to go sit down or look at their phone or um, go take a walk and come back, go grab a little snack. So that's definitely one that I could think of. Squeezing study hall in between a person's classes is the only time open in that day. Yes, yes. And I'm going to talk about study hall very soon. Another one. Having back-to-back appointments in different locations. Yes. Especially if they're like, well, if you're familiar with LSU's campus, they're in treatment at ops, and then they have to come across the street all the way to up the hill to our academic center. And there's just not enough time. And that's when we start hearing that they popped a tire on their scooter, huh? One of my teams has practice in the middle of the day, and my kids will go from class to practice to class to meetings with me and then wait. They're exhausted by our meeting at the end of the day and will not always be productive in study hall. I definitely understand. One effective strategy is reviewing syllabi early in the semester. This may include identifying exam dates, quizzes, and weeks with multiple high-stakes assignments. Students can schedule exams with disability services early rather than waiting until the week of the exam. So one thing that we stress just over and over and over in our office, we use AIM. I'm not sure if every school is using AIM right now, but as soon as that faculty test agreement is in, you can go ahead and schedule all of your exams and quizzes for the entire semester. Scheduling early reduces repeated decision making later in the semester. And if there's a testing window, like I mentioned before, try to schedule the exam towards the beginning of the testing window to add room for flexibility if something comes up closer to the exam. Times can always be adjusted if schedules change. Early scheduling just helps identify compression weeks, for example, like multiple exams during a travel week or exams scheduled immediately after return from travel. Encouraging early review of syllabi really creates visibility, and visibility allows planning. Planning reduces urgency pressure. And this is something that I honestly encourage you to do with your students and not for your students so that they can actually visualize how much is going to be in a set week. So I know when I was a GA, we would just write all of this out for our student. I would write it all out for my students and then just give it to them, and it didn't mean very much to them. right. So these are questions that can support some early conversations between support staff and disability services. So, which courses have complex testing formats? Which exams fall during travel periods? Which weeks involve multiple exams? Which courses require extended time? Which weeks appear highly compressed? Support staff don't need to solve every conflict. The goal is to just identify where planning conversations might be helpful. And if you're using AIM, AIM has the ability to pretty much do anything. It can tell you pretty much answer all of these questions, actually. You can get your full exam schedule. You can see if there's going to be room for rescheduling, all of that. My next question for you is what coordination strategies have worked well between your office and disability services? What coordination strategies have worked well between your office and disability services? Articulation, scheduled communication times, exam proctoring, consistent semesterly meetings, frequent check-ins throughout the semester. I definitely agree. A team of learning specialists have weekly meetings with ODS. We have designated point people that we are liaisons with ODS. Yes. It is helpful for us to know what weeks you're going to have a lot of students in testing with us. And one thing that I try to do is make sure that I'm explaining everything to the student. I'm never under the assumption they know everything that's going on when they come into the testing center. So I just explain the protocol to them and let them know what resources are there, just in case they have forgotten or maybe their mind is somewhere else. One thing that we recently added to our testing space at LSU is a sensory space. So if our students come early, we do have a 15-minute window. So sometimes our students are super anxious and like, can I start my test right now? Like, well, there's a 15-minute window, so you're not going to be able to start the exam for, 12 more minutes, but we do have a sensory space if you want to go in there. So there's like some bean bags in there and some different like flexible seating options. There's like a little it's not like blindfold thing that you put on for migraines and like sometimes I think at first I think students were hesitant to use it and now they've seen that more people are using it and that's been a good way for students to kind of like center themselves before trying to initiate the task of that exam. So students often benefit from externalizing planning structures. So instead of just keeping it all in your head, putting deadlines in a calendar reduces working memory. If you know your students don't check their email consistently, another example of avoidance from cognitive overload, take the time to have them put the reminder in their personal phone calendars. Encouraging students to visualize high compression weeks can support earlier task initiation. Reminders help students plan rather than react and external structure supports executive functioning. We may use a Zen station during finals week. I totally support the Zen station. We have put a sensory room in where the access coordinators are in the office part of our disability services, and then we have put a sensory space in the testing center because we do experience a lot of students that have meltdowns because they just feel like they have so much going on and I just can't take this exam right now, and it has helped tremendously. Um, Also, for our students that have frequent breaks, we've allowed them to go in there because sometimes a frequent break in the exact same space where you're supposed to be taking a test is not super helpful. Okay, study hall, making study hall more effective. So study hall is often one of the most structured academic support student athletes have access to. However, study hall can either reduce cognitive load or unintentionally increase it depending on how it is structured. So one common challenge is initiation difficulty. Initiation difficulty occurs when a student knows they need to begin a task but has trouble identifying the first step. So often what that looks like is our students show up and they spend 20 minutes trying to figure out what they need to work on or to get their materials out. When students arrive at study hall without a clear plan, cognitive energy is spent deciding on what to work on rather than actually working. Decision making requires executive functioning resources. When students are already cognitively fatigued, decision fatigue can make it more likely that students select lower effort tasks rather than high priority tasks. So, what that looks like is I'm just going to do this discussion post that probably takes 20 minutes and they spend the whole hour working on that discussion post because they do not want to work on that paper. So, breaking large assignments into smaller steps helps reduce initiation difficulty because the starting point is clearer. Encouraging students to identify priority tasks before arriving at study hall allows more time to be spent engaging with the material rather than organizing materials. Another chat. Initiation difficulty is real. Yes, it is, even for me. So, um, placing high demand tasks earlier in the session can also improve efficiency because cognitive energy tends to decrease over time. Brief cognitive reset breaks can help students sustain attention across longer work periods. Intentional study hall design support executive functioning capacity and allow students to demonstrate their academic ability more consistently. So I would highly suggest that you consider putting a little in the elementary school. I used to be an elementary school teacher, they call it a brain break, but putting a brain break in the study hall. And students may opt to not use it because they don't want to disengage from the task that they're already working on, but just having that option is very meaningful. And I think it would just decrease the students' um, desire to create their own brain break, which might mean I'm going to go to the bathroom and not come back for 15 minutes just so I can sit there and have a cognitive break and sit on my phone. But if they know that they're built in the study hall, then they have something to look forward to. Um, and maybe planning what you're going to do at the next study hall at the end of this study hall. So we already know what we're working on and we can kind of reduce that time where we're lagging trying to figure out what we're going to work on. So, when executive functioning load becomes too high, students may begin to experience urgency pressure. Urgency pressure occurs when students feel they do not have enough time or cognitive capacity to complete tasks in the expected way. When urgency increases, planning time decreases. Students may delay starting assignments because the task feels complex or just overwhelming. Avoidance can increase anxiety, which further reduces initiation ability. As deadlines approach, students may feel pressure to produce work quickly without adequate time to organize their thinking. We are all seeing an emerging pattern in higher education where AI tools are being used to generate responses in situations where students may not feel confident in their ability to organize ideas or even begin writing. In many cases, the issue is not that the student does not understand the content. The issue is that they are unsure how to structure their response, how to begin, or how to manage the cognitive effort required to even complete the task. Executive functioning skills such as planning, organizing ideas, and sustaining effort are skills that develop over time through practice. If students consistently rely on tools to bypass these processes, they miss opportunities to strengthen those skills. Supporting executive functioning earlier in the semester can reduce urgency pressure later. Examples may include encouraging earlier scheduling of exams, I'm just going to keep saying that one because I work in the testing center. Helping students identify high compression weeks, breaking assignments into smaller, manageable steps, and helping students develop realistic work plans. The goal is not to eliminate the use of technology. The goal is just to ensure that students are still practicing the cognitive skills required for independent learning. When structure supports skill development, academic integrity concerns often decrease. Most of our students want to do well, and providing earlier structure better supports better decision making when the pressure increases. I think that's my last slide. I'm gonna unshare my screen and turn back on my camera. Any thoughts?
Yes, feel free to either unmute yourself or put your questions or thoughts in the chat. We thank you for your participation on a Friday afternoon.
Late on a Friday afternoon. Oh, hey, Walt. I couldn't see everybody before. Okay. I don't
Yeah,
think I
I think you hit on a lot of great points, Silent. Shared a lot of useful information with us. Um, the big key is the support. I know sometimes the thought is if you have a student that's struggling, like, oh, we need to give them a tutor for every class. Maybe they need to meet with a learning specialist. So your 4 classes, 4 different tutors plus a learning specialist, when in reality, that's overloading them more than anything else. So then it's like, how do you structure the support so you're not adding to the problem?
definitely. So hopefully, thank you so much. This was great. Thank you. So I hope that y'all take some time. I know that this is like the burnout season, but take some time to think about how you can adjust schedules, maybe if it has to be done for summer or for next semester, and kind of just reframe your thinking. And think about the neurodivergence as strength. Like those students tend to be very dedicated to work that they are interested in. So, how can you get them to be interested in their work? And where can you reward them with some integrated breaks? And let's just not assume that our students don't want to get the work done or that they are unmotivated, because they are motivated and they want to be here and they want to do well. And I think that's it.
Okay, and just a reminder, I put it in the chat too. Just please remember to fill out the evaluation sessions or the evaluation forms for the sessions that you attended today. And you might be thinking, hey, maybe I'll do that on Monday. But as kind of Silent said, we need to kind of figure out what we need to get done now. So if you could take a couple of minutes, they're not painful to fill out. I've filled out mine for the day. So that would be greatly appreciated. If we don't have any other questions or thoughts, I want to thank Silent for her presentation today and thank you for your attendance and wish everyone a wonderful weekend.